Red just put Canon on notice. Komodo X just dropped $3,000 in price. It's kind of mind-blowing, right? Because when I bought it, it was $10,000 for just the body. And of course, the C400 has been announced and it's in production and will be available in the near future, maybe in September, maybe sometime later this year. But it sells for basically $8,000, $7,999 US dollars. That is now $1,004 more expensive than the Komodo X body only. So let's talk about it. I want to share my thoughts on this price drop from Red on the Komodo X and how it might compare to the C400. Many of you know that I was very excited about the C400 with everything that they announced. I called it the Swiss Army knife of cameras because you could put it into basically any environment, from a run and gun solo shooter to a documentary filmmaker to working in a broadcast environment or in some sort of live event environment. The camera has all the ports and everything that you would need to essentially work in all of those different types of environments, which was one of the reasons why I was very happy. Because here, where I work at my company, we dabble into a lot of these different areas. We do a lot of commercial work, but we've done corporate documentaries, and actually that's a growing part of our business now. And we do live events, and we do podcasts, and different scenarios that require different types of setups. So having a camera that can do something like this, like in the C400, that can work in a lot of different environments, was really, really convenient, handy. Also, they managed to make it a little bit smaller than the C300 Mark III and the C500 Mark II. So that was also welcome. The one other area that we participate in and play a bigger role in is virtual production. So we work with LED volumes, right? And the C400 is not a global shutter camera, but they are using some new form of clear scan that syncs up with LED volumes to make sure that you don't get the artifacts that you would with a traditional CMOS sensor that is not a global shutter sensor, right? So here we are. I was not just excited about the C400, I pre-ordered the C400. And one of the things that happens, and I'm not sure if it happens to you all, but it definitely happens to me, is that when I'm emotional, I'm ready to dive head first. And then as time goes on, from the announcement of the C400 until today, which today is September 4th, 2024, the camera's still not available. Something similar happened with the Pixie, right? Except I was never going to buy the Blackmagic Pixie camera. But all that to say is that as time goes on, and knowing that I'm about to tie up $8,000, or I did tie up $8,000, or both, right? I'm about to, because I've already sort of spent it as soon as it's available. I began to like think about it and question it, which is going to come full circle here with what I'm about to say about Red. It started making me wonder and think, am I really the type of individual that wants to work off of one camera? And the answer is no. Because, for example, in my podcast studio, I've now switched my podcast studio to use all Blackmagic full frame cameras with Canon lenses. So I'm adapting Canon EF lenses to the Blackmagic full frame cameras. They're perfect for that. I don't need to worry about rigging them. I don't need to worry about power. And I can control every single one of those cameras from the A10 Mini. So basically, one operator can run a podcast, even though we're running 4 cameras in the podcast studio. Pretty convenient. If I was going to do that with the 400, you know, that's $8,000 per camera. Whereas going this Blackmagic full frame, right, the 6K full frame, it was $1,500 per camera plus the adapters. So a little bit more than that. That's just a better option for me. Also, I can set up that studio and basically forget it. It's set up, it's ready to go 100% of the time. I don't need to break down the studio so that I could take these cameras and go put them to work somewhere else. That's sort of where I'm at in my career, where I'm at in my quality of life, and what it is that I would rather do. So the C400 definitely didn't fit in that environment. In the virtual production side of things, something very similar, right? I have multiple RED cameras. They are the virtual production workhorses. When I'm going out and about and doing on-location work, the C70, the R5C, those two have been pulling their weight and doing an excellent job at it. For content, the C70 is very difficult to beat with their internal NDs, the recording codecs, the small file sizes. It's basically going to social media, so, you know, it's going to get the job done. It's very difficult to think that the C70 would be a bad choice for that type of work. The R5C, I don't have to worry about overheating. I can capture in 8K. I can capture in 8K 60. Yes, there is the battery life thing, but at this point, I believe I have about 12 of the R5C LP E6 batteries. I think that's what they're called. So I can run all day because the R5C does accept 2 terabyte CF Express Type B cards, which I have 6 of, that essentially allow me to run a full day. Obviously not continuous running, because who shoots for that many hours? Maybe some people do, but I definitely don't shoot for 8 continuous or 10 continuous hours without ever stopping a take. So basically 6 terabytes gets me through the day. It's pretty affordable. I use Angelbird cards, and the R5C does a really good job. If I'm doing a high-end commercial and it is not going to be a virtual production commercial, then I bring my Raptor X, I bring my Komodo X, and then that's the camera that gets the job done. And yes, I do take them out of the virtual production studio to do that, because I can't afford multiple Raptor X and multiple Komodo X until now. And then this leads me to where I am now. So after I lost my enthusiasm for the C400 and I started thinking, am I the type of person that wants to have a camera that can go into any one of these different environments and essentially operate that way? And what I came up with was, if I was going to make that commitment, I needed to buy a minimum of 3 C400s. Good news is that there are some incentives for volume pricing that are available for people that buy in bulk, buy multiples of things from Canon and from some of the Canon dealers. So that would have helped a bit, but I still would have needed to spend $24,000 to be able to qualify for that incentive. And then I started thinking, how often would I actually choose to travel with the C400s, the multiple C400s, to do a job? So I'm going to use the example of, I was in Ireland, I had to do a project, and I did the entire project on 3 R5Cs. It worked out beautifully. I had no problem. It was a multiple day project, or multiple days project, a little bit over a week. And traveling with the R5Cs in that small package, right, because it's relatively small compared to the C400, it just worked out way better. I could literally fit all the equipment, including lenses and batteries and media, into one travel backpack. Obviously, we did it with more than one because we also had, lights and such. But it was a very small footprint to travel all the way to Ireland with, do my work, and then come back and never have to check in luggage or, any of that stuff where potentially my equipment could get damaged. So if I had to do that all over again, and I was the owner of a C400 or in multiple C400s, would I choose the C400s over the R5C for that type of project? And I kept coming back to no, I wouldn't. So then all of a sudden, and this is again where the comparisons are going to begin, I begin to look at the Canon C400, the $8,000 price point, and I begin to think that I am paying for features in the camera that likely will never be used. For me, for someone like me. And I canceled my C400 pre-order. And I know that sounds a little weird because I was very excited about it, but I was. And then I just, between my thinking about my real world situation, what I would put the camera through, how I would use it, when I would use it, when does it play a role, how much money does that type of work bring into the organization, and so on, it just didn't make sense. So I decided to cancel. And then this is sort of where now we can begin to compare. If you're in the market for a camera now, the Komodo X it's one hell of a package. And the C400, in its own way, is also one hell of a camera. And I'm going to start with probably the biggest, my biggest hot take. And that is, if you're in the market for a camera now, because this is how you make a living, this is what you want to do, and you need to make a decision on what to use, because for whatever reason, the equipment or the gear that you have in hand is not doing it for you. The best camera on the market today is the Komodo X for most of us. Now, I'm saying that as a Raptor X owner. Do I think that the Raptor X is a better camera than the Komodo X? Absolutely. But the cameras themselves, right? Like the tier of camera themselves, can't be the only factor that makes the camera great. And what I mean by that specifically is that we all have budgets. We are all aware of how much money's coming in and how much money's going out and the type of work that we find ourselves in. And frankly, it's very difficult unless you're, one of the people that literally uses your cameras in super high-end feature films. I find it very difficult to find a scenario where Komodo X cannot thrive, because Komodo X is able to work in a live production environment. Komodo X is able to work in a broadcast environment. If you need full frame field of view, there are multiple focal reducers that work with Komodo X to give you that full frame look. In my opinion, and I know that this is not red marketing, and clearly my videos are not sponsored, right? But in my opinion, the first multi-format camera that Red put out was Red Komodo. And I say that because it was a Super 35 camera that can also window into Super 16, and you still end up with a beautiful image. Or you could use a focal reducer and get the full frame field of view, not VistaVision, but full frame. So in my opinion, Komodo X has been Red's first true multi-format camera, and it came in at a price point that was very difficult to believe, which now, by the way, OG Komodo is even less expensive. And I'm going to guess that the used market is going to get even more aggressive. And that's one hell of an entryway into the Red ecosystem, which I'm going to talk about here in a few. But going back to Komodo X, which again, I'm saying because of its price point, because of its capabilities, and because of the types of environments that it can work in, it's probably the best camera that anyone can buy unless you have something super specific that you need. So for example, I have friends that absolutely love OpenGate. I'm recording in OpenGate right now because it makes it easier for them to share the content on multiple platforms with multiple orientations and such. I have other friends that only want to work in anamorphic. I think that if you're that type of person, you already know that. And I'm not saying that Komodo can't, because Komodo has a lot of different anamorphic modes that work exceptionally well and do all of the conversions for you in camera, so you don't have to bring in and then de-squeeze in post-production. Because you may have seen some videos on YouTube where people are de-squeezing with the wrong ratios, and you know, the content looks a little wonky. So Komodo helps you out in that sense. So let's begin to discuss the two, right? So I mentioned that Komodo X can basically perform in any environment, and I've also said that about the C400. From live, documentary, run and gun, corporate video, you could even shoot commercials, definitely do short stories. You could shoot a feature if you really wanted to on either of these cameras, and you'd be in good shape. Except one is now less expensive than the other. And I'm going to sort of tackle the sleeping giant, right? Which is another Canon marketing term, which is going to be this triple base ISO. So triple base ISO on the C400 is likely going to be exceptionally well. I've personally, based on my experience working with Canon cameras over the years, including the C200, the high ISO performance on these cameras was already really, really good. And you can also go into the settings and then make additional adjustments to determine how aggressive you want the image processing to be based on what your ISO settings might be, allowing you to get a really nice picture even at astronomical ISOs like 12,800. I have a video about that on my channel, which if you're interested, I think it's called the C200 Extreme High ISO something. You might want to check it out. If I remember to, I'll be sure to link it in case you guys are interested. So ISO performance on these Canon cameras has already been, in my opinion, good enough, even when you're shooting essentially in darkness, which is what that 12,800 ISO video was, right? I was shooting into the ocean, into a bay in Australia. And basically the only lights that are available are the ones that are, on the bridge themselves or on the sidewalks or buildings in the background and around. And anyway, you guys can take a look at that if you're interested. So this triple base ISO thing, I've also had the opportunity to look at some footage that was shot on the C400 at all three ISOs. And I can tell you that when you're looking at the log footage, the noise performance that my head expected wouldn't be there is absolutely there. When you apply the Canon's conversion LUT, a lot of that gets cleaned up, but it's not like mind-blowing awesome. And here's what I mean by that. On Komodo, actually on RED cameras in general, but Komodo X is exceptional at this, and so is Raptor X. You don't have to worry about this idea of which ISO should I be capturing at to get the best possible performance out of my sensor. Because with RED cameras, all we care about is not clipping highlights and not clipping any of the dark or blacks in your scene, and giving the sensor as much data as we can so that in post-production, should you need to, you can then manipulate how much of the darks you recover and how much of the highlights you recover if needed, assuming you didn't clip either side. And if you didn't, then you have all of the sensor information to do whatever makes you happy in post-production. So this idea that a triple base ISO might be worth the extra $1,000 over the Komodo X, I'm going to say that is not even close to being true. I would rather understand that if I feed the sensor all the possible information and I don't clip my highlights, or I set whatever I want my highlights to be at and whatever I want my dark areas to be at, all the information between the darks and the highlights that I choose to keep, I have access to in post-production. That is much more valuable to me than remembering which ISO I should be at to get whatever kind of performance I want out of a camera. It makes it easier for me as a filmmaker, as a content creator, or whatever you guys want to call me, videographer, to work this way. So that to me is way, way, way more valuable, the R3D. The second thing, full frame versus Super 35. So, of course, Canon is going to do the Canon marketing thing. It's full frame, it'll do Super 35, it'll do Super 16. So I talked about this earlier, but Komodo X is a Super 35 camera. It has an RF mount. They both have RF mounts. A focal reducer allows you to get full frame field of view, and you add one extra stop of light into the sensor, making it that much more sensitive. That's a key point, because now the camera became even more sensitive when you're choosing to use it with a focal reducer. Essentially, you get cleaner images through, or you spend less money on lighting because you're able to get more light into the sensor when you're using a focal reducer. That's a big, big selling point for someone like me. Now, if you don't want to invest, which at this point, I'm not even sure what the right investment strategy would be, even for someone like me. But if you don't want to spend the money on the very expensive RF lenses, then really PL is probably the more universal thing that you should do or consider. And a lot of my friends have taken that route. I didn't, at least not early enough, because it just makes more sense. And here's why I'm saying this. If you choose to lock yourself into the RF lens side of things, you're going to end up with a lot of lenses that require internal image processing corrections to get the best out of that lens. The new 35mm RF lens that Canon put out, the L version, it has some distortion challenges that can only be corrected if you put that lens on a Canon camera. What I would call awesome 24-105 RF Z something, really long lens that Canon came out, It also has challenges that require image processing corrections that can only happen when you put it on a compatible Canon camera. So not all Canon cameras are actively correcting for the lens's problems. Clearly, the only ones that really need to work at it are the full frame cameras, because the Super 35s, they're already cropping in and essentially correcting a lot of the problems associated with it. So if you put one of these lenses that has the distortion problems associated to it on a C70 as an example, the C70 has much less to correct because it's already windowing in on the image circle of the lens. But you put that same lens on, say, a KOMODO, KOMODO X, a V-Raptor X, you end up seeing all of that distortion in its full glory. So going the RF mount L lens route, unless you are only buying the ones that are better corrected, is probably not the absolute best investment. Which then leads us to EF options. They both have RF mounts, and you can use EF lenses. Well, EF lenses are, I would call them dirt cheap at this point. And one lens that I don't think gets a lot of attention for whatever reason is the original EF 24-105. I think it's the version 2 or version 3. I don't remember the exact version. But you put that lens, which is under $1,000, right? I believe it's like $700 and some odd dollars these days. Used, of course. You put that on a focal reducer and you put it on a KOMODO X, and now you have a 24-105 f2.8 lens on KOMODO X that didn't cost you an arm and a leg and is really well corrected and doesn't have all of the weird distortion challenges that you want. And by the way, it's also image stabilized. So you lose absolutely nothing by going that route. So again, the winner, in my opinion, is KOMODO X, simply because of the flexibility that you have of spending less money and getting similar, if not better, results than what you would with the C400. I'm not even going to touch image quality, because the images that I've seen coming out of the C400 at this point are good, but they're not mind-blowing. And the images that I've seen, either on my projects or other people's projects out of the KOMODO X, are exceptional. They're beautiful, they're gorgeous, they're organic, they're commercial, they're awesome. And I haven't seen that mind-blowing type image from a C400 video at this point. So we'll just leave that at that. Controlling the camera remotely. There is no better option, in my opinion, today than Red Control app. The Red Control app is better than the Blackmagic Bluetooth app. It's better than Canon's pay for the license professional camera control app. It allows you to do and operate every single function in the camera with your smartphone, with the tablet, or with a laptop. And if you have more than one of those cameras, and you have a iPad Pro or a laptop, you're able to control all those cameras with the Pro version of Red Control. So, in my opinion, the remote capabilities of controlling these cameras, again, goes to Red. It's just a better option. It's a better experience. And it does a really good job at staying connected. Let's talk about autofocus, because clearly Canon is going to win, right? If you're using Canon lenses, you're going to get a better autofocus experience out of the C400. when and if it ships versus the Komodo X. But I would argue that the Komodo X autofocus, if you're doing things like interviews, stand-ups, product shots, live events where somebody's talking, say, on a podium or something like that, like a presentation, it's sticky. It works. But more and more, after you sort of have worked for a while and you begin to build lens collections, you begin to appreciate how much more you enjoy controlling the focus or the focus plane. And autofocus almost becomes a thing that is great if you're a vlogger, or if you need to be in front of the camera and you're shooting yourself all the time, right? Then it's super convenient. But if you are the guy behind the camera, operating the camera, and you're working with other people, then autofocus is no longer one of those super important things. Let's talk about ports. If you need Genlock, and maybe ask yourself this, when was the last time you used Genlock? And if the answer is, it's been a while or you haven't, then why do you want to pay the extra money for features you're never going to use on the C400? If you need it, it's there. That's awesome. If you need Genlock on Komodo X, you're able to get it too. You are. SDI out. I think that's really awesome that they included it on the C400. There are two SDI outs. One of them is 12G, the other one is not, which really means only one can carry a 4K signal, which is good if you're working, again, in an environment where you need to send a 4K signal to, say, Video Village or something like that. And if you need to get a second feed, say, to a focus puller, which I would argue that the 4K feed should go to the focus puller, right? Your first AC should probably get that 4K feed before Video Village does. But whatever, you're able to then have a second SDI. On Komodo X, you only have one SDI out. It is 12G, which means it's 4K. But you're also able to, again, wirelessly broadcast a high-quality feed to a computer or to an iPad. If you need more than one SDI out, most of us have at least one wireless transmitter system or one monitor that has loop through, allowing us to get that extra SDI out. So there is no, like, I wouldn't give the win to the C400, and not because I'm biased towards Red, but rather because the amount of times that I've needed to use both SDI outs out of a camera and then also loop another one out because of an external monitor that I was using or something like that are not often enough, is what I would say. This year, I can probably, well, I can tell you, maybe 3 times this year. And this is already, September. So that's why I'm not giving the win to the C400. It's just my opinion and my thoughts here. They can both do 6K, 4K at 120 frames per second, right? And they can also do 4K 60p, 6K 60p, which is great. The C400 says it can do 6K 60p DCI. But what they don't tell you is that the sensor is not wide enough to do DCI, like proper, true DCI. It is exactly 6K, which really means to do DCI, they crop the top and bottom of the sensor to give you the aspect ratio of DCI. you don't have that issue on Komodo X. So for me, because I want as much of the sensor as I can use and have, I'm going to again give the win to the Komodo X. I think autofocus really is the only area that if you absolutely rely on, the C400 is a better camera. But I would argue that whatever you can get out of the C400, you can also get out of the R5C, which is significantly less expensive. But again, if you are, let's say you're setting up multiple cameras in a house of worship environment or in some other sort of venue, like actually I have a buddy that is setting up a camera array at a horse track. So for a scenario like that, then yeah, the C400 is probably a better choice than the R5C. But in many cases, for those of us that move the camera around or where the camera has to do more than one job, going with something like the C400, you really do end up paying for features that you likely will never use. And that's where I'm still leaning towards the modularity of something like the Komodo X. Now, just to be fair, the Komodo X is going to need additional things to make it work, right? Like you're going to need a monitor, which is not included. Whereas on the C400, you have a monitor. Is it any good? It sounds like it's okay, but not great. And it sounds like Canon is expecting that third-party manufacturers will make compatible equipment for them. Like, for example, they're not going to make an EVF. And we were all excited about the USB-C EVF that Blackmagic is making, thinking it would work with the Canon C400. It will not. So I guess those are sort of the things to consider. Canon is giving us a very capable camera in the C400 that can do a lot of things, but you do end up paying for features in that camera that you may not be using on a regular basis. And you're also hoping that the third-party manufacturers end up producing the accessories you want and need to allow you to use the camera in a way that you would expect. Komodo X, you already know what accessories are out there. If you don't need things like Genlock, as an example, you don't have to pay for that. If you don't like working with mini XLRs, I used to not be a fan of that. Now it doesn't bother me as much. With Komodo X, you don't have that problem. If you always want to run, say, audio using something like the Sennheiser AVX system, and you're only needing one channel of audio, or even two channels of audio for that matter, there's one cable that you can buy that is not very expensive relative to paying for the built-in dual mini XLRs on the Canon C400. So there are lots of different trade-offs, right? Again, if you need audio, you will need to either buy a cable or buy some sort of adapter. They're not very expensive. The cables, even if you buy them from Red, which is probably the most expensive way to buy that cable, it's only $70. And if you buy the XLR adapter, I don't remember what that price is, but you guys can maybe check it out in the link. I'll have Johnny add a link to this video. You don't need to do that with the C400, except you need to spend the money on mini XLR to full-size XLR cables. And those, I think, Condor Blues are probably the best option in the market in terms of price and value. And I think that those, if I'm not mistaken, they're about $30. So, you know, you end up buying accessories regardless of which camera system you're on. Somebody's going to say The C400 has dual card slots. Yeah, but they're not both CF Express Type B. So you can't record the same way. And maybe the biggest real world difference between these two cameras beyond the price point is the workflow. Nothing, in my opinion, can beat the R3D workflow. It doesn't matter which RED camera you're shooting on. The workflow is identical. The workflow makes it super fast to render, whether it's 6K or 8K, and it doesn't matter which flavor of that it is on a modern computer. I have a Mac Studio. I think it's whatever the maxed out version is, but it's not the M3 chip, it's the M2 chip. And it just flies through whatever I throw at it. I don't have to denoise my red footage from Komodo X or from Raptor X. If any of you have worked with Canon raw light from the C200, the R5C sometimes, it's not as fast. Nowhere near as fast. And I realize that there are tools to, allow you to have a smoother editing experience and so forth. But it doesn't compare. And then maybe another one of these big stickling points for me is how, regardless of which RED camera I'm using, I can get my images to always match. And Canon, for years at this point, has made it super clear that if you're not buying multiple copies of the same camera, you're going to get a different image look out of whatever the different camera is. So the R5C matches the R5, which I thought that was actually really nice. Thank God that they kept the same image processing and same image sensor. But as soon as the sensor changes, you're going to get a slightly different variation of Canon colors. And while that might seem like it's not a big deal, I'll give you an example. I had a project that I shot on Friday. So just one day, 3.5 terabytes worth of footage, multiple shots, like 5 different setups. Had I not shot all that on RED, I would have spent a lot of time adjusting from the different setups and the different angles from each of the different cameras had I chosen to use, say, a C300 Mark III, a C500, an R5C, and a C70. It would have been a nightmare. But because I used the exact same, but it's the image pipeline, the workflow, the RED workflow, R3D workflow, IPP2, because I used the exact same workflow, I was able to very seamlessly, with essentially no effort, match all my angles, takes, and color, and luminance values and everything very quickly. I could literally make correction on one of the clips, in whatever that take is, and then literally select all of the other clips that were shot in that same take, in the same setup, and paste everything and have it work without issues, without artifacts, and without challenges. And I can't tell you how much time that saves. And that's why, for someone like me, seeing that RED just dropped the Komodo X by $3,000, if I was going to buy another camera today, I'd buy a RED. Take care.